This is Simple Joys, a hope story that heals. Every word is a piece of life. Every twist a hidden truth. Stay with us and let this story guide your heart. I used to hate the sound of her slippers. The soft, dragging hush on the cracked hallway tiles would arrive before she did. And somehow it always told the truth about us thin, tired, and cheap. When I heard that sound outside my classroom door, my stomach clenched like a fist. Evan, her voice would hover, gentle and apologetic at the same time. You forgot your lunch. I remember the plastic bag, clear enough for anyone to see the giant red letters from the dollar store. The way the handles cut into her knuckles because she refused to ask for another bag. I remember how light it felt in my hand to peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, half an apple she'd sliced and saved from the day before, a can of off-brand soda. I also remember the laughter at the back of the room, not even unkind at first, just surprised like, "Wow, we can actually see poor. Thanks," I would mutter, not meeting her eyes, already pushing the bag into my backpack so it wouldn't show. I never asked her to come. She always did. At home we lived above a laundromat that hummed long after midnight. The air smelled like steam and bleach and the faint sweetness of cheap detergent. And in winter the dryer vents gave the hallway a warmth that felt like someone else's kindness. Mom worked 3 jobs when she could get them, scrubbing floors in the morning at the community center, washing dishes at the Canton Palace in the afternoon, and sometimes selling tamales out of our kitchen late into the night for neighbors who'd order by text and pick up at the back stairwell. She never drove. She didn't have a license or the confidence. So she walked everywhere in those same faded slippers. "My feet know the road," she'd joke, tapping the heel with one finger. "They don't need leather to find you." Sometimes I think about that line and want to step back into the past just to hug her, until her bones protest. But I didn't hug her then. I learned the art of turning away. On Tuesdays after school she took an extra shift at Mrs. Doyle's house, 2 blocks over, polishing everything until it gleamed with a kind of anger people like bright. She'd say, "If it shines, they think life is clean." I would sit at the tiny formica table in our kitchen and do my homework while she scrubbed, her back curved like a question mark over a bucket of suds. Steam fogged the window. The glass wept. When I'd get a math problem right, I'd want to show her, but she was always in the middle of something, scouring, rinsing, ringing. I'd wait. Then the waiting would harden into resentment. Why did everything about us have to be later? One afternoon, the sink clogged again. The pipe coughed up rusty water that smelled like pennies and old rain. Mom rolled up her sleeves, plunged both hands into that cold throat, and laughed at herself for making a mess. Gray hairs had started to scatter along her hairline like frost, and the pink skin around her wrists was rubbed raw where rubber gloves should have been. She didn't own any. "I'll buy you a pair," I said, surprised by the kindness of my own voice. She shook her head. "Save your money," she said. "Save all your money." "I don't have any," I said, sharper than I intended. She nodded like she agreed with me. At school, I learned new ways to inventory what I didn't have. There were shoes you could identify from across the cafeteria because the swoosh was thicker, because the sole was a different kind of white. There were phones that made other phones look like obituaries. There were backpacks that carried their brand like a passport, and there were backpacks like mine, held together by duct tape that tried to pretend it was silver on purpose. I didn't want to be cruel. I just wanted to be invisible. The week before, freshman orientation, Mom pulled me aside with the worried smile she used when she wanted to deliver good news carefully, like handing me a glass ornament. "I got you something," she said, and reached behind the couch to retrieve a showbox wrapped in a grocery bag to keep the rain out. I knew already that I couldn't afford what I wanted, but my heart still leapt. Maybe, I thought, maybe some miracle had made itself cheap. She opened the box with ceremony. Inside lay a pair of white sneakers whose whiteness had been worked at with a toothbrush and baking soda. The laces were clean, but felt like the wrong kind of rope. The shoes weren't new. They were new to us. "They're from Mrs. Doyle's nephew," she said quickly, measuring my face. "He grew out of them. I cleaned them. They look so good." Yes, they did not look so good. I swallowed the protest because I had watched her kneel by the sink at midnight, scrubbing circles into those shoes like she was erasing our past. I told myself I could wear them before school started and scuff them enough that no one would know. They'd once belonged to someone else's story. But orientation arrived, and the shoes still looked like a secret you could spot from a mile away. We took the bus together that morning because she wanted to see the campus. "Big day," she kept saying, as if repeating it could turn it into a shield. The bus was full of city noise, whining brakes, the bass hum of tired conversation, the smell of coffee and rain. My shoes squeaked against the rubber mat with each stop. A girl across the aisle glanced down and then up at me. I felt my ears burn. Mom pretended not to notice, her eyes busy counting clouds. When we got off, the school's brick facade rose in front of us with banners that read "Welcome Freshmen," in letters so cheerful they felt mocking. There were parent volunteers with clipboards, football players lifting boxes of T-shirts like they held the entire fall inside them, a marching band tuning their horns into something brass and hopeful. I wanted that hope to be for me. I also wanted it to not see us. "I'll come with you to the office," Mom said. She straightened the collar of my second-best shirt, the one that still had a tiny bleach spot near the hem. "We will ask about your schedule." "Yes, you don't have to," I said, already scanning the crowd for anyone from middle school who might remember my face. "I can handle it." "Of course you can handle it," she said, proud. "But I want to see where you will be. I want to see the place that will teach you to be bigger than me." "Mom," I hissed, because two boys in varsity jackets had turned our way at the sound of her accent. "Lower your voice." She did. She always did. "Okay," she whispered. "I am quiet. I am quiet." Inside, the office smelled like toner and citrus cleaner. The counselor, a woman with framed degrees and a nameplate that was too shiny, handed me a folder and smiled in a way that made me feel like a form with legs. Mom asked about after-school programs, about bus passes, about free lunch. I felt the counselor's gaze flicker between us and wished I could pack my mother into that folder and close it. Afterward, in the hallway, Mom pressed the showbox back into my hands. "One more thing," she said. "I know you said these are okay, but I want you to have something new." She lifted the lid and my breath caught. Nestled in newspaper was a different pair of actual new shoes. No scuffs, the kind of white that made its own weather. The brand wasn't the most expensive, but it was known. My heart raced toward them and crashed into something else instead, the recognition of cost. I didn't know all the numbers, but I knew enough to add, "Mom, how? I do not tell you all my tricks." She smiled and held up a finger that was already bandaged where a knife had slipped the night before. "Special order of tamales. You made that much from tamales and Mrs. Doyle." She added quickly, then corrected, "No, no, not Mrs. Doyle, Mrs. Doyle's daughter. She had a party. I made a deal. It is a good deal, a deal." The word tasted like metal in my mouth. I pictured my mother in Mrs. Doyle's kitchen, hair covered, back bent, steaming pots and oil popping, her slippers dark with wet. I pictured her hauling coolers up and down our stairs, breathless and smiling so I wouldn't see it. "What was the deal?" I asked. She hesitated. "I will clean their back porch and their garage for 2 months. But it is okay. It was dirty. I like to clean. It makes my mind quiet." I stared at the shoes. They were so white the box looked grey next to them. At the bottom of the box, the receipt still showed, the numbers like a confession. She hadn't even asked them to wrap it. She had been in a hurry. She had been proud. Heat flooded my face, and then drained away so fast I felt dizzy. "I can't wear these," I said. "Why?" "Because," I snapped, looking at the banner. Again, at the kids in their easy lives. At the parents with coffee in to-go cups that matched their cars. "Because they'll know." "Know what?" Her forehead creased. "That your mother loves you. That my mother bought shoes with her hands," I said, and when I heard it, I hated myself. But the words were already out there, and she caught them like a slap. She blinked twice and looked down into the box, like maybe she had missed something else she had meant to give me. Then she shut the lid gently. "Okay," she whispered, "okay." We walked home in a silence so loud the traffic seemed to recoil from it. The week unspooled in little humiliations. My classmates didn't mock me outright. They just learned how not to see me, which somehow felt worse. I learned the routes through school that passed the fewest eyes. I learned how to eat quickly and fold my hunger into a joke. I learned to laugh in one syllable, a sound that ended before it could be recognized. At home, Mom kept moving. She started waking up an hour earlier, which did not seem mathematically possible, and leaving tamales in a cooler by the door for Mr. Singh at the corner store. "He sells them for me," she said, delighted by the small economy she'd created. "He is a businessman. I am a businesswoman. She held up her hands red from the dish pit, chapped from bleach. Look, business hands. Those are work hands, I said. They are also love hands, she said, and wiggled her fingers like 10 small flags. 3 days before the official first day of classes, the day with the pep rally, the day everyone planned their outfits. For weeks in advance she came home later than usual, wet hair slicked to her neck from the rain, a brown paper bag folded against her chest. "I got your books," she said, panting a little. "Used but good. Very good. Smell them." She handed me the bag, laughing. "Smell is knowledge." I didn't smell them. I pulled out the algebra book and felt the cover bend under my fingers because the binding was loose. "It's fine," I said. "It is more than fine," she said. "It is the door." I wanted to be the kind of son who kissed her on the cheek and said thank you and meant it. I wanted to be the hero of a different story. But I was the boy who had started counting. Count the shoes she'd cleaned, the plates she'd scraped, the porches she'd scrubbed. Count the times I'd heard the word pour as if it were a personality trait. Count the eyes that slid away. The morning of the rally, the sky was a hard, perfect blue that looked like something expensive. I dressed in the shirt our neighbor Mrs. Alvarez had ironed for me, and chose the older pair of sneakers, the ones she'd scrubbed with baking soda. They weren't great, but at least I already knew the worst they could say about me. Mom stood in the doorway and adjusted my collar like she was dialing in a signal. "Wait," she said suddenly. I almost forgot. She hurried to the kitchen, the slipper shuffle echoing across the floor, and returned with a small box wrapped in the comics section of the newspaper. "What is that?" I asked, wary and curious in equal measure. "Open," she said. Inside was a battered leather belt. The buckle was simple and unbranded. The leather bore the ghost of another man's waist. She saw my confusion and smiled. "My father," she said softly. "Your grandfather. He wore this when he came here. He said it was strong. He said, if you put your faith and your work together, you do not need a tight belt. But sometimes you need to be held together anyway." She lifted the belt and smoothed her fingers along its length. "He would want you to have it." I took it mechanically, as if accepting an artifact from a museum. I pictured my grandfather in a town I had never known, crossing a border I had only heard about in stories, wearing this belt like a promise. I wrapped it around my waist. It fit. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. And for a second we were the version of ourselves I wished we could be. Grateful son, proud mother. Then the bus was there, and the stadium, and the flood of kids moving. In a current I had to learn to swim in. The band was louder this time, the cheerleaders brighter, the sun ruthless in its happiness. I tried to disappear into the bleachers. Halfway through, just after the principal made a joke that made the math department laugh too loudly, I heard the familiar hush of her slippers on concrete. It was impossible. The stadium had steps. The stadium had ushers, but the sound found me anyway, and I turned to see her making her way down the aisle, with both hands cradling something wrapped in a grocery bag. Her hair was damp at the ends. Her shirt was the good one, the one with the floral pattern that always made her stand straighter. She had put on lipstick and then blotted it away to almost nothing. "Evan," she called, not loudly, but loud. Enough. Heat climbed my neck. A few heads turned. The boy next to me smirked at his friend. "What are you doing?" I stood up, panic and anger climbing into my chest like twin thieves. She reached me, breathless. "I wanted to catch you before you go with your friends. I wanted to give you." She pressed the bag into my hands. Inside, something soft. "Socks," she said, triumphant and shy at once. "Good socks, to stop your feet from hurting." And she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded note. "Bus pass for the month." I saved. The world narrowed to the radius of her face. "Mom," I hissed, every word a match head. "You can't be here." "Why?" She blinked, the lipstick finally giving up on her mouth, leaving only the outline of intent. "Parents are look." She gestured toward the rows of mothers and fathers, baseball caps and handbags. Cameras held like shields. "They are here. Not like this," I said. "Like what?" I didn't know how to answer without saying something irreparable. I could feel the eyes now, not many, but enough. Enough to make me think of every hallway, every soda can, every laugh that wasn't about me until it was. The bag in my hands rustled like an accusation. I heard the boy behind me whisper, "Is that his mom?" and someone else chuckle, and then a girl's voice say, "That's sweet," in a way that made sweet sound like dumb. "Please," she said softly, "just take it. I have to be at work in 10 minutes. I will go. Take it." The boy behind me echoed, too loud, "Take the socks, man." The bleachers under my feet were hot, everything tilted. I grabbed the bag and felt the knotted handles grind into my fingers. The note for the bus pass slid loose and fluttered toward the steps. She lunged for it and almost lost her balance. I caught her elbow, steadied her, and in that split second our eyes met. And I saw it. Pride, worry, determination, love, everything she had ever been to me, crowded into one look. It made me angrier. "You said you would be quiet," I said, through my teeth. "I am," she whispered. "I am quiet." But she wasn't invisible. She would never be invisible. Not with those slippers. Not with those hands. Not with that love she wore like a sign she didn't know how to take off. Something in me broke. Or maybe it calcified. "Mom," I said, louder now, and the word didn't sound like love. "I told you not to come." Her face changed. Not much. Just enough. I pulled the bag open. The socks were folded. 2 pairs, white with a blue stripe. The sight of them so ordinary, so earnest made humiliation spike through me like a fever. I yanked them out, felt the cheap cotton in my palm, and then God help me I threw them. Not far, just far enough. They landed 2 rows down, a stupid little tumble of kindness rolling away from us. A few people gasped. The boy behind me laughed once. Sharp. "Evan," she said. My name soft like it could still fix this. "I told you not to come," I repeated. And this time my voice carried. Silence fell in a circle round us. The band missed a beat. A cheer died, mid-raw. She looked at the socks, where they had fallen, and then at me. and for a heartbeat I thought she might step backward until the sun swallowed her. Instead, she bent, picked up the socks, smoothed them like a tablecloth at our kitchen table, and placed them back in the bag. Her hands shook only a little. "I am sorry," she said. "I will go." She turned and began to climb each step, measured each step an apology to the concrete. The bag swung against her hip. She held herself the way the brave do when they know someone is watching. I stood there, chest heaving, the belt at my waist suddenly too tight. A teacher cleared his throat into the microphone, making feedback squeal across the stadium. "Let's give a big hand for our amazing marching band." Applause exploded because people needed something to do with their hands. I sat down. I couldn't breathe. The boy behind me said, "Dude," again, but softer now, like even he wasn't sure he wanted to be on my side. The girl who had said, "Sweet," pretended to fix her ponytail while staring at me with pity that felt like acid. I should have run after my mother. I should have slid down the steps and said anything with a please in it. Instead, I watched the back of her head move higher, smaller, disappear. The sun pressed its hot palm on my face like punishment. When I finally looked down, I saw the note her note caught in the bend of the bleacher, folded in a way that showed the date and nothing else. I reached for it. The paper rasped under my fingers. I tucked it into my pocket and gripped it until the edges dug crescents into my skin. On the field, the band rallied. The game of school resumed. Over the loudspeaker, our principal shouted about pride and legacy and being a family. The word family ricocheted around my chest and hit nothing it could stay on. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough to learn that sometimes shame is a room with no doors. You stand up to leave and find out the walls travel with you. When I finally stood, the belt creaked like an old wooden step. I put one foot on the aisle, then another. I walked up and up and up, and every row I passed felt like a witness. At the top, the light narrowed, the stadium's roar softened, and for a brief, dizzy second I thought I could hear the city again, the laundromat hum, the bus brakes, the whisper of slippers. I didn't see her outside. I didn't see her at the bus stop or on the corner where Mr. Singh sold scratch-offs to men with resigned faces. Maybe she had already reached the Canton Palace in time to tie her apron without missing a beat. Maybe she had ducked into the church on 3rd Street to light a candle for a son who had just told her to leave. Maybe she had found a bench in the little park by the river and sat there until her hands were steady. I did not look for her. I walked home alone under a sun that wouldn't let anything hide. The paper in my pocket warm from my palm. On the back stairwell, our neighbor's kid had chalked a crooked hopscotch grid. These squares leapt to 10 and then to heaven, the way children think the world works. I stepped over it like it was a trap. Inside, our kitchen smelled like boiled corn and bleach. On the table, a note in her careful block letters. Work. Back late. Heat the soup. Love you. The last 2 words were darker where she had pressed too hard with the pen. I turned on the faucet and let the water run until it was cold, and then drank from my hands. as if I could wash the morning from my mouth. My reflection in the window over the sink looked like a boy I didn't want to know. I took the belt off and set it gently on the chair like it might accuse me if I let it fall. The house creaked, the way old things do when they're listening. On the counter, beside the stove, sat the showbox, the new shoes I had rejected. I lifted the lid and stared at them again. At the whiteness that had cost hours and hands and a deal she shouldn't have had to make. I touched the toe of one shoe with one finger and felt something in my chest. Pitched toward a cliff, I closed the lid softly. Then I did the cruelest thing in a day full of cruelties. I slid the box back under the bed, farther than before, where I wouldn't have to trip over it on my way to anything. Outside, a bus hissed to a stop and released its passengers in a sigh. I imagined the slippers stepping down, finding the pavement, turning toward a restaurant door. I imagined the note in my pocket as a bus pass, smooth and certain, escorting me toward a future I had no right to without her. I pressed the paper flat with my palm and finally unfolded it. It wasn't just a bus pass. It was also a little drawing in the corner, a wobbly smiley face with 2 long eyelashes. Under it, in tiny letters, "Stand tall. Shoes don't make the man. His walk does." I read the line again and again until the words blurred. Then I folded it back up neatly, like someone prim and careful, and shoved it deep into my wallet. It cut like a secret. Before I left for my afternoon shift at the hardware store, my own small contribution. That never felt like enough. I put on the old sneakers, the baking soda white turning gray in the creases, and told myself I didn't care. I told myself everyone was on their own. I told myself I was building a life that would never need the sound of slippers to find me. But that evening, while I stocked shelves and Mr. McAllister whistled along with the radio, the stadium silence returned, laid itself over my shoulders, and would not move. I didn't know it then, but the echo of my words, "I told you not to come," had already begun its long journey back to me, taking the route of every bus she would ride, every floor she would scrub, every plate she would stack and unstack, until the day it would find me again, in front of everyone, and demand to be answered. The fall after the rally moved like a machine. Classes clicked from one hour to the next. The campus breathed caffeine and ambition. I learned the names of buildings faster than I learned the names of people. I told myself this was growth forward, motion measured in credits and steps. The truth was simpler. I had become very good at not looking back. I didn't move into the dorms. The financial aid package had a gap big enough to fall through. So I rented a damp studio above a nail salon to bus stops from campus, and 3 worlds from where I'd started. The ceiling stained after every rain. The radiator hissed like it was angry to help, and the hallway smelled faintly of acetone and hope. At night, the electric sign outside blinked N_I_S until even the word nails seemed to be missing something. I added a second job stocking at the hardware store on weeknights and prepping for the breakfast shift at a campus cafe on weekends. Between both and classes, I built a schedule that left only the thin margins for sleep. In those margins, the memory of her slippers sometimes walked. Mom texted, always the same way. Each message shaved down so it wouldn't take up too much room. Eat enough. Wear a jacket. Call me when you can. Proud of you. I answered with thumbs up. Emojis more often than words. When I did type, I chose practical sentences like I was building a wall. Busy. All good. Class now. Later. I told myself she would understand. She always did. The first letter from the bursar's office came the second week of October. A polite envelope with an impolite number. Outstanding balance. $1,180 for $72. Payable by a date that came with a penalty if I missed it. Like debts could be taught manners. I folded the letter into fourths, creasing the paper until it sighed, and slid it under the salt shaker on my narrow counter, as if that could keep it from blowing away into panic. I tried everything before I tried her. I asked my manager at the cafe for extra shifts. He gave me one and a lesson about boundaries. I sold an old guitar I'd found at a yard sale 2 summers ago. That still smelled like someone else's songs. I returned a textbook and borrowed a dog-eared copy from a kid in the back row who looked at me like charity was his major. I skipped lunches until my stomach learned to be quiet in public. 2 days before the due date, a new letter arrived. Payment. Received $600. The line item said cash, and the handwriting next to the receipt number was unfamiliar but careful. I stared at the page as if it might confess a mistake. The balance now wore a smaller face. The relief should have made me light. It made me heavy. I didn't ask Mom. She didn't say. The next week, another payment posted. $250. Cash. Then $100.00. Then $30 for $72. Like someone had shaken a jar of coins until it stopped making sense and then poured the last sound into my future. When I went to the bursar's office to beg for a payment plan, the woman behind the glass slid my file across the counter. You're fine, she said without looking up. Someone's been paying. Little by little. Cool. The word jumped out before I could stop it. She finally met my eyes. There was a tired kindness there, the kind you learn working with numbers and their consequences. We don't share that, she said gently. But if you have someone in your corner, thank them. Students don't always. I didn't thank anyone. I left with a paper that said I owed nothing and a stomach that thought otherwise. My advisor assigned a faculty mentor to every first-gen student. I had told the form I wasn't one pride or denial. Take your pick, but algorithms are sometimes more honest than boys. That's how I met Professor Holden, who taught ethics with the weary patience of someone who had watched too many people choose convenience over conscience. He was the kind of tall that made chairs look imprecise. His office smelled like old books and orange peels. On my first visit, he pointed to the chair across from his desk and said, "You can sit in that one. The other one wobbles unless you want to have an experience." "I'm fine," I said, choosing the steady chair. I had had enough experiences. He asked me about classes, about work, about the shape of my days. I gave him the resume version of my life verbs with accomplishments after them. He listened the way one listens to the ocean from a distance, with curiosity and suspicion. When I finished, he steepled his fingers. "Is your mother well?" he asked, the question lodged in my throat. "She's busy," I said. "She works a lot." "That is not the same as well," he said mildly. "But I understand. When the people who love us are busy, we pretend it equals health." He paused. "I grew up in a house where we were always pretending. I decided not to like him. Liking him seemed dangerous. Liking meant being seen." 2 weeks later, crossing the quad at dawn to open the cafe, I saw a woman kneeling at the bottom of the library's steps with a bucket and a rag. The campus at that hour was all hush and fog, even. The fountains sounded like they had taken a vow of silence. The woman scrubbed the place where a muddy footprint broke the clean line of concrete, moving her hand in small, efficient circles as if she could change the world eventually. Her hair was pulled back in a low knot. She wore a thin sweater even. Though the air gnawed, red skin showed above the line where rubber gloves should have been. From the distance, she could have been any mother and all mothers. Then the rag paused. She shook out her wrist, flexed her fingers like 10 small flags, and leaned back into the work with a hum that I could not hear but recognized. I froze. The fog lifted its hem, just enough for me to see her shoe slippers, the same faded ones, the soles dark with water, the same hush. Mom didn't look up. She didn't have to. I knew the lift of her shoulders, the determination living in the hinge of her jaw. She scrubbed, rinsed, wrung. When she finished the step, she stood slowly, kneading the small of her back with one hand, and moved to the next. I stepped behind the oak statue like a coward and watched her finish the row. A campus truck rumbled by, and the driver lifted 2 fingers off the steering wheel. In a greeting as local as weather, she smiled, small and quick, and bent again. I should have called out. I should have walked over and said, "Let me," or at least, "Why?" Instead, I stood there, invisible by choice, and let the fog take her again. At the cafe, I burned my hand on the espresso machine because my head wasn't where my body was. The manager clicked his tongue. "Focus, Evan," he said, handing me a cup of ice like a reprimand. Focus had always been my trick. Suddenly, it felt like a lie. That afternoon, after economics, I found Professor Holden waiting outside the lecture hall, hands in the pockets of a jacket he had probably owned since the last recession. "Walk with me," he said. We crossed campus, in the kind of silence that wasn't empty. He nodded at the library steps when we reached them. To clean lines of concrete rose like certainty. "Do you know who cleans these?" he asked. "The facilities team," I said. "To quick." "Yes," he said. "But do you know any of their names?" I stared at the place where the mud had been. "No," I said. He rocked back on his heels, considering. "A young woman at the bursar's office is my niece," he said at last. "She does student hours. There, she mentioned a mother who comes in early, pays in small cash 10s and 5s and crumpled ones, always polite, always apologizing for the denominations. She brings the student's ID number written on the back of a grocery receipt. Because she has it memorized but is afraid the nerves will scramble it, she waits for the balance to change on the screen like it's an altar, says thank you twice, and leaves. He glanced at me. Sometimes she goes straight to the library steps afterwards. My mouth went dry. A lot of mothers, I said. A lot of steps. A lot of patterns, he said gently. I opened my mouth to tell him to mind his business, to explain that I had it under control, to perform being a man who didn't need reminding. What came out instead was nothing, the kind of nothing that makes a shape. He let the silence settle like dust. If someone is paying in that way, he said after a moment, it means every bill counted on a counter in a kitchen that never rests. He looked toward the city. It means wrists that ache in the night. I didn't ask her to, I said, and the defense sounded so thin I wanted to apologize to air. No one said you did, he said. Pride says I didn't ask. Love hears. I shouldn't have to be asked to see. He slid his hands deeper into his pockets. You don't have to tell me anything. But do me a favor. When you pass these steps, say thank you to the concrete. Sometimes gratitude needs practice before it remembers its person. He walked away without looking back. I stared at the steps until they blurred. Then I whispered thank you to no one and felt ridiculous and almost better. Work kept trying to save me from myself. A promotion to shift lead at the cafe came with an extra $1 an hour and the privilege of being yelled at for other people's mistakes. At the hardware store, Mr. McAllister started leaving a container of leftover chili in the back fridge with a note. Take it or I call your mother. He thought he was being funny. He was being effective. In November, I met Mara. She was in my ethics discussion. The kind of girl who made you forget to breathe if you didn't pace yourself. Her family owned a furniture store that sold couches with names, and she had a way of turning every circle of desks into an audience. When she laughed, she threw her whole head back like even her throat trusted the future. We started studying together, then not studying together. She liked my opinions until they got close to my life. I kept that part of me folded small. Once, waiting for a movie, she asked about my parents in the easy way of people who answer that question with brunch stories. My mom's around, I said. It's complicated. I told her my father wasn't in the picture because it was a sentence that sounded like a decision instead of an absence. She invited me to Thanksgiving at her house. I brought a pie I couldn't afford and compliments for the backsplash that looked like it had been flown in from Italy. Her mother wore a sweater the color of a blush you're proud of, and her father shook my hand with a grip that said he enjoyed winning. The kitchen was large enough to have its own weather. The counters gleamed the way people like bright. For a second, I saw my mother bent over this same shine in a different house, polishing anger into reflection. After dinner, Mara's dad clapped me on the back. Good head on your shoulders, he said. Where'd you get your work ethic? I opened my mouth to say my mother and heard instead my jobs. Mara laughed and kissed me on the cheek. He's all grit, she said. No one asked what grit cost. December made our breath visible. The nail salon downstairs added Christmas lights to the sign so that my window glowed red and green all night like my room couldn't make up its mind. Finals bent me into a shape my body didn't admire. On the last day of the semester, I found an envelope slid under my apartment door. Inside was 6 receipts from the bursar, each stamped paid, and a note in her careful block letters for next month too, if needed. Work more. Love you. M. I stared at the M as if it were a stranger's initial. The heat in my face felt like shame shaken awake. I tucked the receipts under the salt shaker with the others, because apparently that was where I kept the evidence. Winter break didn't feel like a break. I picked up extra shifts and told Mara I couldn't come to her family's cabin because one of the pipes at my job had burst and they needed me. They didn't. But the lie was easier to carry than the truth. On New Year's Eve, the cafe closed early, and I walked home through a city throwing confetti at midnight. I passed the Canton Palace. Through the steamed window, I saw my mother, hair tied in a scarf, flipping dumplings with a wrist that moved like a metronome. A cook shouted, she laughed, shook her head, and kept moving. I pressed a hand to the glass like a ghost, then slid it into my pocket and kept walking. In January, she brought me a sweater and 2 bags of tamales and the soft, exhausted pride of a woman making something out of air. She left them on my doormat because I wasn't home and because she didn't want to bother the boy I was pretending to be. When I texted thank you with an exclamation point, she wrote back, "Wear the blue one when it's cold. It looks like sky." Mid-semester, the bursar sent another warning, a delayed balance due. I circled numbers like turning them into geometry would solve them. Then, one morning, the problem solved itself without my permission. Payment received. $800.00 cash. The entry sat on my student portal like a miracle that smelled faintly of bleach. The same day, Professor Holden stopped me after class. Office hours, he said. It wasn't a question. On his desk sat a small white box. He slid it to me across a stack of essays. Inside were 3 pins, the kind that make your handwriting look like an apology and a note. For someone who keeps writing past, what's easy? He leaned back, studying me. There is a difference, he said, between being helped and being owned. Your mother is not buying you, she's buying you time. I didn't ask her for time, I said, snapping the lid back on the box. I didn't want gifts I couldn't repay. No, he agreed. You asked for a future with your silence. He didn't say I saw her at the library. He didn't say my niece told me. He didn't say, I know. He looked at me like a man who had once paid for his own life with the wrong currency. If you need a job on campus that pays more per hour than the cafe, he said, I can recommend you to the archives. It's quiet. It won't fix everything. It will help. I took the job. In the archives, I shelved histories and learned how much paper it takes to prove something happened. In the silence, I could hear the sound of slippers if I let it. I didn't let it often. March brought a cold snap and a phone call from Mrs. Alvarez, our old neighbor. Don't panic, she said in a voice that was already moving furniture out of the way. Your mom fainted at church this morning. Just tired. They gave her some juice. She refused the hospital like it was a credit card. I'm bringing her home. I was across town at the cafe, pouring milks into different shapes customers pretended were animals. When the call came, the world tightened into a single straw. Is she okay? She will be if she rests, Mrs. Alvarez said. Tell her to rest. I will, I said, and didn't. When I went by the apartment that night, the crockpot hummed. The light over the sink burned, and a wristband from an urgent care clinic sat sliced neatly in the trash can under a paper towel, like a secret that had cleaned up after itself. Mom smiled too brightly. Don't worry, she said. They said I am just tired. I told them I am always tired. We laughed. She made us tea and wouldn't sit down to drink it. Let me take a shift, I said finally. Let me help. You are helping, she said, touching my cheek like I was 5 and had just put away my toys. You are making me a man with a son in college. That's not a thing, I said, and she tilted her head. It is to me, she said. On the bus back to my place, I took out my wallet to check if I had enough for the week's groceries and felt the edge of her. Old note the bus pass with the wobbly smiley face and the words, stand tall. Shoes don't make the man, his walk does. I almost tore it, just to see if rage could make paper into something else. I put it back. Spring crept up in pale greens. Finals announcements bloomed on bulletin boards like weeds. Graduation banners went up for the seniors. I wasn't one yet, but the air had that ceremonial smell, as if even the trees were ironing their leaves. I found out about the commencement keynote because Mara tagged me in a post about it. Some tech philanthropist with a last name that sounded like an app was coming to tell the class they could do anything if they did it his way. In the comments, people argued about success and luck like they were enemies. I scrolled and then stopped on a photo of the stadium. The bleachers looked the same from that angle rose rising into a blue. That didn't care who was sitting there. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Professor Holden caught me outside the archives. Do you have a minute? He asked. I didn't. I did anyway. We walked to the edge of the quad where the magnolias were doing their yearly impression of forgiveness. He handed me a program draft for graduation. I'm on the planning committee this year, he said. Like a confession, I pushed for a section where we honor the people behind the graduates. Usually, we do a blanket thanks, parents and loved ones. I thought maybe we could do something more accurate. Accurate? I asked. The paper loud in my hands. As in, he said, sometimes the person who saved you is sitting in the last row, trying not to be seen. My chest went tight. Please don't, I said, surprising both of us with how fast the words came. Don't what? Don't make a thing of it, I said, the old panic waking up, stretching. It's private. He studied me. Is it? He asked, not unkind. Or is it just unsaid? He didn't press. He folded the program back into his jacket pocket and nodded at the magnolias. They bloom whether we invite them or not, he said. The tree doesn't check the guest list. I told Mara I wasn't sure I wanted to go to commencement. She stared at me like I had said I didn't believe in gravity. "Are you kidding?" she said. "You did all this and you're not going to walk?" "I'm busy," I said. "Work, life, everyone's busy," she said, and kissed me like my excuses were cute. "We're going to celebrate. I already got the shoes." The word made me flinch. She didn't notice. She sent me a link to a suit she thought I'd look good in and a playlist for the after party. I clicked the link, saw the price, closed the tab, and came up with a dozen ways to not be in pictures. The week of commencement. The bursar posted the final line. Balance, $0. The zeros looked obscene. I printed the page and held it like proof that the past could be tricked. That night, I went by our old apartment, the one over the laundromat, to drop off a bag of groceries and a lecture about rest I would deliver carefully so it sounded like love. Mrs. Alvarez opened the door with flour on her hands. "She's at the church," she said, setting up chairs for the graduation prayer service. I found Mom in the sanctuary, alone with paper programs and a roll of tape. The air was cool and smelled like candle wax, and lemon oil the same. Smell every kind of faith uses to convince you it's always been here. She stood on a folding chair to hang a banner that read, "We are proud of you," in letters someone's child had colored and cut out. The Y slipped sideways under her fingers. She laughed at it and fixed it with a second piece of tape. "Don't do that," I said, meaning the chair, meaning the banner, meaning everything. She turned, surprised and delighted, like I was a gift. She hadn't expected to unwrap yet. "Evan, look." She gestured at the banner as if I might have missed it. "We will have cookies. I made the lemon ones you like." "I can't stay," I said, even though I could. I held up the bag of groceries like a shield. "I brought these." She climbed down from the chair carefully, like surrendering height. "Thank you," she said. And then she looked at my face the way she had when I was 10 and trying to hide a scraped knee. "You are eating." "Yes, yes." "You are sleeping, more or less." "You are proud?" The last question came out almost shy. I stared at the banner over her head. The Y had started to tilt again. Stubborn letter. "I'm graduating," I said. It wasn't an answer. It was a fact standing between us like furniture. She nodded like that was the right shape for now. "I will sit in the back," she said. "I do not have a dress for the front." She laughed at herself and touched my shoulder, light as a moth. "I will clap very quietly so I do not embarrass you." Something in my throat stung. "You never embarrass me." I lied. "Okay," she said, pretending to believe me the way you pretend your team can still win in the last minute. "I am very happy. God is very good. Your feet are very strong." She meant steady. She meant something only she could say, in a language where grammar made room for hope. On my way out, I passed the donation table. A clear plastic box held small bills and coins, a little mountain of people trying to be helpful. On top sat an envelope with my name on it. Inside, $20 and a note in a different hand. From Mr. Singh. "Tell your mother I said stop paying for everyone's candles." I laughed. a sound with water in it, and slid the money back into the envelope. The night before commencement, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the yellow wash of the nail salon sign and listened to the city throw a party I wasn't invited to. I took the belt from the chair where I kept it, the one that had fit like it had been waiting for me, and ran my finger over the worn leather. I remembered what my mother had said about her father. If you put your faith and your work together, you do not need a tight belt. But sometimes you need to be held together anyway. I fastened it around my waist and tried to imagine faith as something that could be buckled in the morning. The sky put on its best blue. I put on the suit I had borrowed from Mr. McAllister. It hung differently than mine would have hung, but it was clean and it forgave me. I slid the bus pass note into my wallet because maybe luck likes continuity. I stood in the mirror and practiced a face that looked like someone who deserved this. On campus, the stadium was already a swarm of colors, gowns, sashes, bouquets. The brass band tuned hope into something loud. The air smelled like cut grass and new beginnings and the faint metal of nerves. Rows of chairs stitched the field into order. I found my place in line with the other seniors whose last names started with the same letter as mine. Mara waved from 3 rows over, snapped a photo, and texted me a heart. My phone buzzed with messages from numbers I hadn't saved. Group chats. Congratulations, emojis wearing little caps. I scanned the bleachers out of habit and out of fear, looking for a floral shirt, a damp strand of hair that wouldn't stay tucked, a pair of slippers bravely trying to pass for shoes. I didn't see her. Relief and disappointment wrestled in the narrow space between my ribs. Ready? A guy next to me asked, bouncing on the balls of his feet. I think so, I said, and felt the lie fit my mouth too easily. Across the field, near the stage, I spotted Professor Holden with a clipboard. He looked like a man trying to stay out of a photograph. When our eyes met, he inclined his head the way old movies make men do. It felt like someone had just told the truth in a room full of speeches. The band struck up the processional. We began to walk. The air was bright enough to sting. As we neared the seats, I slipped my hand into my pocket and touched the note like a talisman. Stand tall. Shoes don't make the man. His walk does. I looked down at my feet. The borrowed leather shined an obedient hand, put one in front of the other. Halfway to my row, the stadium opened in my chest like a scar reopening dot at the very back, where the bleachers meet the sky as if both ran out of ideas. I saw her. I might have missed her if I hadn't been looking every second since I arrived. She wore a simple blue dress that did, astonishingly, look like sky. Her hair was pinned with 2 bobby pins that didn't exactly agree with each other. From that distance, I could not see her face. I didn't need to. I knew the angle of her shoulders, the way she held her hands when she was trying to be smaller than the world. She sat down carefully, like she didn't want to creak. Then, as if remembering a rule, she clapped twice alone, a quiet rehearsal, and folded her hands in her lap. I looked away because I didn't know what my face was doing. The line moved. The band played like no one had ever been poor. On the stage, the tech philanthropist smiled like a billboard. The president of the university thanked donors by name and families, and loved ones by category. The sun radiated approval indiscriminately. I felt the belt settle against my hip bones like a history from my seat. I could see the path that led up from the field to the podium. I could also see, through the heat shimmer, the last row of bleachers. Mom's dress held its piece of sky. I gripped the edge of my program and waited for the part where I would stand and cross the stage and keep walking like I had always done. Then, Professor Holden stepped to the microphone to introduce the keynote, and the script shifted. He cleared his throat. "Before we begin," he said, "we're going to do something I've wanted to do for 27 years of teaching." He paused, eyes on the last row, voice finding the register people use for prayer and announcements. That changed the air. We're going to thank, specifically, the people who paid in small bills and big sacrifices. If you are one of those people and you know who you are today, please stand. Or, if standing isn't your way, lift your hand. We would like to see you. A murmur ran the length of the bleachers. Heads turned like birds. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, at the very back, my mother lifted her hand. Not high, not dramatic, just enough to be counted. I stopped breathing. The stadium did not. The band didn't. The world kept going. But something in me stalled, and then inch by inch began to turn. When my mother lifted her hand, it was not dramatic. It rose the way she always did everything that changed my life quietly, like she didn't want to block anyone's view. A ripple went through the bleachers. A few other hands followed, tired. Hands, careful hands, hands with wedding bands dulled by soap. Hands that trembled and then held. The sound the stadium made wasn't cheering. It was air learning how to be respectful. From the stage, Professor Holden shaded his eyes. He wasn't smiling. He looked the way a man looks when he finally finds the word that fits. "There you are," he said into the microphone, as if he had misplaced something important, and now it had answered. "Thank you." The band did not play. The brass held its breath. Somewhere behind me, a child asked, "Why are they standing?" In a voice the whole stadium pretended not to hear, because we were all busy answering the question to ourselves. The tech philanthropist stepped forward with his practiced grin, and a hand extended to take the mic. Holden didn't hand it over. "Before we begin," he said, "we're going to do one more thing I should have done years ago. We are going to ask a graduate to say out loud what so many of you have paid for in receipts that never made it into any ledger." His eyes moved over the sea of caps and faces and landed, somehow, on mine. "Evan," he said. The name startled me even though it belonged to me. Heads turned. The boy next to me made a low sound like he'd been waiting for someone else to be chosen. Mara's text arrived a second later. "Oh my God, go," as if the decision required a push. I didn't stand immediately. My body remembered too many bleachers, too many times choosing smallness. The belt at my waist creaked like an old house settling. I slid my hand into my pocket and touched the folded bus pass note. "Stand tall. Shoes don't make the man," His walk does. I let the paper edge cut a crescent into my finger. Then I stood. The row parted in a rustle of polyester and surprise. I walked down the aisle of chairs like a man crossing a river on stones he couldn't see, until his foot found them. Up close, the stage smelled like sun-warmed wood and microphones handled by too many speeches. Holden met me at the steps. 2 minutes, he murmured, which was too long and not enough. I took the microphone. It was heavier than I expected, as if language had weight. "Hi," I said, and my voice came back to me multiplied, the stadium handing it around. I didn't know I was going to do this. A laugh moved through the crowd and dissolved. I licked my lips. Somewhere in the back, a blue dress held steady. A small piece of sky refusing to change its weather. "I want to thank my professors," I began, "because that's how these things start, and because buying time is a reflex, and my bosses who let me trade hours like baseball cards, and my classmates who shared notes and coffee and the answers to questions no one wanted to ask out loud." I paused. The paper in my pocket hummed like a quiet engine. "But," I said, the word opening like a door I had avoided for years, "the truth is, the person who got me here has never met a syllabus. She's not on LinkedIn. She doesn't know what a resume bullet point is, unless you count every time she scrubbed someone else's floor until it could see its own reflection." The stadium went still in a new way. "I told her not to come once," I said, "at a rally freshman year. She brought me socks." The memory crawled up my throat. I swallowed and kept going. "I told her not to come because I was ashamed of the sound her slippers made. I thought it sounded like poverty. I was wrong. It sounded like love." My voice cracked. I let it. It sounded like someone who paid in 1s and 5s at the bursar's office while smiling at a computer screen, like it was a miracle that believed her back. It sounded like fingers that cleaned our library's steps before the sun, so people could start their day pretending the world had always been that clean. A murmur ran through the stadium. Recognition, maybe, or the start of remorse in strangers who saw themselves in one boy's mistake. I took the note from my pocket with hands that didn't feel like mine and unfolded it. The paper had softened from being held. The smiley face in the corner looked more brave than cheerful. "She wrote me this," I said, voice low enough that the microphone had to lean toward me. "Stand tall. Shoes don't make the man. His walk does." I threw her socks. She kept walking. Anyway, I looked up at the last row. Even from the distance, I could tell my mother was crying the way she always cried in public economically. She lifted her hand again, just a little, as if to say it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry. I was done obeying that particular kindness. "I need to fix something," I said, and handed the microphone back to Holden before anyone could tell me what a graduation ceremony is or isn't supposed to be. I stepped down from the stage and didn't turn toward the path the ushers had drawn like a clean sentence. I turned toward the bleachers. There was a gasp, the kind a crowd makes when someone deviates, like watching a bird take off in the wrong direction. I walked, then jogged, then ran. The field felt longer from the ground than it had from my seat. Caps blurred into a single color. The brass section shifted their instruments like shields. An usher took a nervous half-step to intercept me and then decided he didn't want to be the villain in whatever this was. I reached the base of the bleachers and started to climb. The metal steps radiated heat through my borrowed soles. Each rung clanged like a gilt rung into a bell. People parted because it is human to make way for someone who looks like he has finally remembered something. I climbed and climbed until the sunlight became a hard thing I had to breathe around at. The top she stood. For a second, we were the same height, and the sight of it hurt. Up close. The blue dress was fraying at the hem. Her lipstick was gone, but the outline of the attempt remained a border around kindness. Evan, she said, my name small and whole in her mouth. I'm sorry, I said, and the syllables didn't feel like enough English. I'm so. My throat closed. I tried again. At the rally, my voice failed me, just before it would have ruined me. So I did the only other thing my body knew how to do. I went to my knees. The stadium exhaled. Somewhere, a child clapped once, confused and enthusiastic. Kneel down, oh, Evan, don't, she whispered, reaching as if to lift me by the shoulders back into dignity. Stand up. Your pants, your knees. She laughed through tears, like she had found something to fix and needed tools. Mom, I said, and the word found its real pitch. I told you not to come. I threw your gift. I let the sound of your slippers make me small. You paid for a future I wanted to pretend I built alone. I am so sorry. Her hands hovered and then landed, warm on my face, thumbs against the corners of my eyes like she could catch what leaked. You are here, she said, simple like a solved problem. That is my apology. No, I shook my head. I need to say it in front of everyone. I turned and realized I already had. The stadium watched not like voyeurs, but like witnesses drafted into a ceremony they hadn't known they needed. She laughed again, smaller. Then help me stand, she said. I am not as young as I used to be. I stood, and so did she. She smoothed the front of her dress, as if wrinkles could be ashamed. For a second, we just stood there together at the edge of the sky. The whole stadium below us, like a sea deciding whether it wanted to be calm. Would you come with me? I asked. To the stage. She shook her head immediately, reflexive. No, no, that is not for me. I will clap from here. I clap very quietly so I do not embarrass me. I finished, and we both winced at the ghost of that lie. Please. She looked at the stairs as if calculating the price. Then she nodded, but in her way half a nod that left room for change. I offered my arm, and she took it. Her hand was smaller than I remembered, or maybe my arm had learned to be something it hadn't been before. We descended. People moved. A woman I didn't know reached out and touched my mother's sleeve, then her own heart. A man lifted his cap. A teenager lifted her phone and then lowered it without taking the shots a moment's refuse to be owned. The brass players lowered their instruments like flags at the bottom. We crossed the track. The field held its breath and pretended to be grass. We reached the steps to the stage, and I remembered she hates stairs when people are watching. I glanced around for an alternate route. There wasn't one that would keep us from the world. An usher appeared with a kindness I will never be able to repay, and offered his hand. Another appeared on the other side. Together, slowly, we climbed. At the top, the tech philanthropist stood back with the educated expression of a man who knows when a story isn't his. Holden's eyes were wet and unapologetic. I led my mother to the microphone. She stopped a foot short of it, like it might be hot. "You don't have to," I whispered. "I know," she said, "but maybe I do." She lifted her chin and took one small step forward. The microphone picked up the sound of her breath, the most honest thing it had held all day. "I am not good with this," she began, and already the stadium was in love with her. Because humility is a language without accent, I wanted to sit in the back and clap very quietly. A laugh rose and fell like a soft tide. "But my son is brave today." She turned toward me, and her smile made something under my ribs reorder itself. "I do not have many words. I have hands. They are not pretty hands." She held them up, red and roughed by 1,000 clean things. "But they can work. They can make tamales and mop and hold a boy's face when he is sad. They can pay $10 and $5 and $1 until a computer says 0. She looked back at the last row, as if addressing the other quiet payers. "Your hands, I see them. Thank you." She stepped back, the whole stadium leaning unconsciously forward as if to keep her from falling. I took her place, the bus bass note still open in my hand, and lifted the microphone to the height of the kind of man I wanted to be. "This is my mother," I said. "Her name is Marisol." Saying her name into a sound system felt like writing it on the side of a building. I don't have a better degree than the one she gave me, which was the ability to keep going when the floor is not interested in letting you stand. I turned to Holden. "Professor, you told me my mother wasn't buying me. She was buying me time." My voice steadied. "I'm going to spend it right." I looked at the president, who held a diploma cover like a prop. "With your permission, I'd like to do something." He nodded the way administrators nod when they're not sure what the donor on the program will think. "Go ahead," he said, and 1,000 people breathed in at once. I took the cap from my head, the cap I had imagined wearing in mirror after mirror, and set it gently on my mother's hair, the bobby pins protesting and then submitting. It sat crooked. I straightened it. She laughed, a sound like a relief valve releasing pressure in the world. Then I went down on one knee again, not for shame this time, but for ceremony, and held out the diploma cover. "This belongs to you," I said. "No, no," she said, hands fluttering, trying to return a gift she had bought. "It is yours, it's ours," I said, and pressed it into her hands until her fingers accepted the shape. The stadium stood. There wasn't time for clapping to become a rhythm. It stayed an event. Individual hands meeting themselves loudly. People cried in the safe way crowds let you cry. The band, without being told, started to play something that wasn't on the program, and old hymn someone's grandmother would have recognized even if no one had written it down. I turned back to the microphone and raised the note. For anyone out there, I said, who paid in small bills and big sacrifices, who cleaned steps no one saw, who stood in back rows, who made a life out of ones and fives, this walk is for you. I looked at my mother. I told you not to come. I was wrong. Please, come with me. We left the stage, not down the side ramp they built for smoothness, but down the same steps we'd climbed. Because sometimes you have to undo a mistake by reversing the exact route. On the field, the line of graduates opened like a mouth-forming O. We walked the center aisle together, blue dress, crooked cap, belt fastened like a promise. When my row came, I didn't let go. The usher, God bless him, again moved to chairs, and my mother sat beside me in a seat that had not been intended for her, and therefore fit perfectly. Why not the keynote speaker gave his speech? It was good in the way expensive words are good, polished, effective, full of arithmetic that turns grit into inevitability. I heard it as if through a wall. My mother held the diploma cover in her lap like a baby she wasn't sure would sleep. If she breathed too loud when they called my name, we stood together. We walked together. The president shook my hand and then, after an almost comic double take, shook hers, too. The photographer captured it, but the photo is the least true version of that moment. The truest version lives where the note lies folded and carried back at our seats. Mara pressed through the rows and threw her arms round my neck. You didn't tell me you were going to do that. She laughed, tears cutting clean tracks through her mascara. I didn't know, I said. I just knew. She turned to my mother and said all the right things. Your son is amazing. You must be so proud because Mara is good at languages that make people feel seen in photographs. My mother squeezed her hand and said, he is learning, and we all smiled like a future could be built on that sentence alone. After the ceremony, the field became a beehive of reunions. Balloons bumped the sky and tried to remember where they came from. We moved through it slowly, people stopping us to say things that made my mother laugh and cover her mouth, and then stop covering her mouth. Mr. McAllister materialized with a bouquet that looked stolen from a better occasion. Sandpaper. Hands, do good work, he told her. Don't let him forget. Never, she said. Professor Holden found us near the 50-yard line. He shook my hand, and then my mother's, and neither of those shakes were ceremonial. Thank you, he said, like maybe we had finished a chapter he'd started writing in his head years ago, and now didn't have to carry around anymore. Thank you, my mother said back. You are the man who sees steps. He tilted his head. I try, he said. I miss a lot. He looked at me. Don't miss the next ones. We walked home because buses felt too modern for what we had done. The belt rode my waist like it had been waiting for this exact walk. At the corner store, Mr. Singh rang a little bell when we passed, then pretended not to have rung it. Graduates get free candy, he announced to no one. Mothers get, too. He slid two caramels across the counter toward my mother, and one toward me. Don't argue, he said, as if he had met me before. up the back stairs, past the hopscotch grid that someone had refreshed in new chalk, into the cool dim of the kitchen that smelled like lemon and stove smoke, and the last 10 years. I placed the diploma cover on the table next to the salt shaker where the receipts lived. My mother touched it once and then busied herself with the kettle because joy is easier to carry when your hands are occupied. I took the show box out from under the bed where I had hid it. The new shoe stared up at me, white like unasked questions. "These," I said, setting the box on the table between two cups that would soon be tea, "are going to be the first thing I wear to my new job." She blinked. "New job. Archives," I said. "Campus." Professor Holden helped. "It pays more. I'll keep the cafe until the loans make more sense. I'll take you to a restaurant where we don't know where the back door is. The list I had held back for years spilled out like groceries from a bag that had finally given up. "I'm going to take the morning shift at the library steps." She smiled. A slow thing that moved from surprise to protest to acceptance, like light across a wall. "You will be late for class if you clean steps." "I'll be early for being a person," I said. She shook her head because she is allergic to her own heroism. "We will see. Then we will see." With less resistance, she reached across the table and took my hand. Her palm was rough and perfect. "Your walk is better today," she said. "Did you feel it?" "I did," I said. "I will." Again, steam whispered from the kettle. She rose to pour, and I rose to help. Our elbows bumped, then found their choreography. In the window over the sink, our reflection stood shoulder to shoulder, a small, ordinary miracle pretending not to be. Later, when the cups were empty, and the apartment had settled into the evening version of itself, I pulled the bus note from my wallet and smoothed it flat. The paper had thinned in the middle where my thumb had worried it into wisdom. I taped it to the fridge with the same carefulness she had used on the church banner. A little crooked, stubbornly legible. "Keep it there," I said, "so I remember. So I don't have to remind you," she said, and we both laughed. Because we finally believed we were on the same side of that sentence dot in the weeks that followed. The world didn't become easy. Bills still acted like bills. Work still had bosses. Some days, Mara's future and mine spoke different dialects and had to repeat themselves to be understood. But every morning, on my way across campus to the archives, I stopped at the library steps. I knelt not on my knees, not in penance, but in maintenance, and wiped away the mud left by shoes that didn't know what they were stepping on. Students walked by and didn't notice. Once in a while, one did. They'd hesitate, start to say something, and then nod instead, like they had just translated a sentence correctly. When I finished, I stood and looked at the concrete until it looked back. "Thank you," I said, because gratitude still needed practice. Then I checked the time and went where I was going. The sound of slippers replaced by the sound of my own steps, steady, unashamed, loud enough to follow if anyone I loved needed to find me. Sometimes, in the archives quiet, I caught my mother's hum in the rattle of the air vent or the soft thud of a book Ray shelved properly. I would smile, close my eyes, and let the sound finish this sentence it had been writing my whole life. Sometimes the poorest hands build the richest future. And if the man those hands raised remembers to walk back for the person in the last row, the future is not only rich, it is right.